The rain over Chicago wasn't gentle. It was a relentless, icy downpour that turned the city into a blur of gray concrete and shimmering, reflected neon. For Mateo, a man whose soul was still tuned to the warm, dry heat of the Guatemalan highlands, each drop felt like a tiny needle of cold rejection. He huddled deeper into his worn jacket, the one his mother had given him with tears in her eyes, a lifetime ago it seemed. His work boots, caked in the dried mud of a dozen different construction sites, splashed through puddles as he walked the long 30 blocks from the bus stop to the single-room apartment he shared with 3 other men. The bus fare was a luxury he couldn't afford every day, not when every dollar had a destination. Rent, the remittance to his ailing mother in San Marcos, the ever-mounting debt to the coyote who had guided him across 3 borders. His body ached with a deep, bone-weary fatigue. His hands, raw and calloused, were clenched in his pockets, clutching the $73 in cash he'd been paid for 10 hours of back-breaking labor. It was a pittance, but it was something. It was survival. His thoughts, as they often did, drifted to his daughter Lucia. Her 8th birthday was in 2 weeks. The image of her smile, a beacon in the fog of his exhaustion, was the only thing that kept him putting one foot in front of the other on these brutal evenings. He missed her with a physical pain, a hollow ache in his chest that never truly went away. He was doing this for her, for a future where she wouldn't have to watch her mother work herself into an early grave, for a chance that she might go to school beyond the 6th grade. This was the sacrifice. This cold, this loneliness, this constant, gnawing fear of being discovered, of being seen as less than human. He was a ghost in this bustling city, invisible to the well-dressed people rushing past him, their umbrellas creating a fortress against the world and against him. He was just a man trying to be a father from 2,000 miles away. The rain intensified and Mateo picked up his pace, his head down against the stinging wind, a solitary figure in a storm that was both meteorological and deeply, profoundly personal. He was almost home, almost to the temporary shelter that never truly felt like one, when he saw her. A small figure, curled into a ball under the scant protection of a shuttered bakery's awning. She was just a child, no older than his Lucia, and she was sobbing, her small shoulders shaking uncontrollably. And in that moment, Mateo's own storm ceased to matter. She was drenched. Her pink backpack, adorned with a cartoon horse, was a dark, saturated maroon from the rain. Her blonde hair was plastered to her forehead, and her sobs were the kind that came from a place of pure, unadulterated terror. People hurried past, their faces obscured by hoods and umbrellas, their lives too busy, too important, to stop for a crying child. But Mateo stopped. His own daughter's face superimposed itself over this little girl's. What if it was Lucia? Lost, cold, and frightened in a city that didn't care? The thought was a knife to his heart. He approached slowly, careful not to startle her. He knelt down, ignoring the cold water that immediately soaked through the knee of his work pants. Nina? He said softly, his voice gentle. Are you okay? Xinghao, estás perdida? Xinghao, are you lost? The girl looked up, her blue eyes wide with fear, rimmed with red. She flinched back slightly, a reaction he was used to, a reminder of the space he was supposed to occupy in this world. The invisible, potentially dangerous stranger. He didn't move closer. He just stayed there, kneeling in the rain, making himself small, non-threatening. It's okay, he said, switching to the English he'd painstakingly learned. I can help. You are safe. He offered a tentative smile, the lines of worry on his face softening. The girl, sniffling, hugged her knees tighter. I can't find my daddy, she whimpered. We were at the store and I saw a dog and I followed it and then. I'm lost. Mateo's heart clenched. He looked up and down the street. It was getting darker, the storm showing no sign of relenting. This was no place for a child. He had to do something. But what? Calling the police was a risk he couldn't take. His status was a house of cards, one strong gust of authority away from collapsing. But he couldn't leave her. The memory of his mother's words, spoken a lifetime ago in their small kitchen, echoed in his mind. Hijo, no matter how poor you are, you can always afford to be kind. He made a decision. He would stay with her until she was safe. He would find a way. This was more important than his fear, more important than the $73 in his pocket, more important than the warm room he was desperate to get to. This was a human being, a child, who needed help. And so, Mateo, the invisible man, decided to be seen. "Your name?" Mateo asked, his voice a calm anchor in the girl's storm of panic. "Am Maya," she stammered, her teeth beginning to chatter from the cold. "Okay, Maya. My name is Mateo. We will find your daddy, yes." He shrugged off his wet jacket, the one precious possession that held a whisper of home, and draped it over her small shoulders. It swamped her, the damp fabric smelling of rain, sweat, and a faint, earthy scent of the construction site. But it was warm from his body heat. Maya looked up at him, her eyes wide with a new kind of surprise. This man, with his rough hands and tired eyes, was giving her his coat. He wasn't rushing her. He wasn't yelling. He was just there. "Are you hungry?" he asked. She nodded, a small, hesitant movement. From his other pocket, Mateo pulled out the brown paper bag that held his dinner. A single ham and cheese sandwich and a banana he'd saved from his lunch break. He hadn't eaten since noon. His stomach growled in protest, but he ignored it. He broke the sandwich in half and gave her the larger piece, along with the banana. "Eat," he said. "You will feel better." While Maya ate, shivering less now, Mateo thought. He couldn't use his cheap, prepaid phone to call for help. It wasn't registered, and he feared the trace. He saw a brightly lit coffee shop across the street. "Maya, do you know your daddy's phone number? Can you remember?" Maya's face lit up. "Yes. I know it. Mommy makes me say it every day." Hope, fierce and bright, flared in Mateo's chest. "Good. Very good. We will go in there," he pointed to the coffee shop. "And we will ask someone to call your daddy. Okay." He held out his hand. Maya, her trust in him now complete, slipped her small, cold hand into his large, calloused one. He led her across the street, his body shielding her from the worst of the rain. Inside, the warmth was a physical shock. The air smelled of roasted coffee and cinnamon. A few patrons looked up, their eyes flickering with curiosity, and a hint of suspicion at the sight of the soaked, rough-looking man and the small blonde girl in his oversized jacket. Mateo's courage almost failed him. He felt every eye upon him, judging him. He approached the young woman behind the counter. "Please," he said, his voice low. "This girl, she is lost. She knows her father's number. Can you call? Please." The barista, her name tag reading Chloe, looked from Maya's pleading face to Mateo's earnest, worried eyes. She nodded. "Of course." She took the number Maya recited and dialed. The wait was the longest of Mateo's life. Mateo stood with Maya near the entrance, not wanting to drip on the clean floors or invade the space of the paying customers. He felt exposed under the bright, hipster-style lights of the coffee shop. Every time the door chimed, his heart leaped into his throat, half expecting to see police officers. He kept a gentle hand on Maya's shoulder, a gesture of reassurance for her, but also a grounding touch for himself. He could feel the subtle tension in the room, the unasked questions hanging in the air. Who was he? Why was he with this child? He was hyper-aware of his appearance, his muddy boots, his worn-out jeans, his accent. He was a walking stereotype, and he knew it. He prayed that the father would arrive before anyone decided to take matters into their own hands. Maya, comforted by the warmth and the food, started to talk. She told him about her school, her friend Lily who had a pet rabbit, and how she wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up. Mateo listened, truly listened, his eyes never leaving her face. He nodded, asking small questions, his smile genuine. For a few minutes, he wasn't an undocumented immigrant in a hostile city. He was just a man talking to a child, sharing a moment of simple human connection. It was a balm on his lonely soul. Then, a black SUV screeched to a halt outside, double parking. The door to the coffee shop burst open, and a man rushed in. He was tall, dressed in a sharp, expensive-looking business suit that was now rumpled and damp. His face was a mask of pure, undiluted panic. "Maya!" he yelled, his voice cracking with emotion. Maya tore away from Mateo and flew into her father's arms. "Daddy!" The man, whose name was David, fell to his knees, clutching his daughter as if he would never let go, his body shaking with relief. He buried his face in her hair, whispering, "Oh my God, baby, I was so scared. I was so scared." The other patrons in the shop smiled, some wiping tears from their own eyes. It was a beautiful, emotional reunion. And then David's eyes lifted and found Mateo. The gratitude in them was immediately joined by a flicker of something else: assessment, curiosity. He stood up, holding Maya tightly in his arms, and walked over to the man who had saved his daughter. "Thank you," David said, his voice thick with emotion. He extended his hand. "Thank you so much. I don't know what to say. Where did you find her?" Mateo shook the man's hand, a firm, confident grip that seemed to surprise David. "Under the awning next street," Mateo said, pointing vaguely. "She was cold. And scared." "You stayed with her," David stated. It wasn't a question. He was looking at Mateo, really looking at him now. He saw the worn jacket now back on Mateo's shoulders, still dripping onto the floor. He saw the honest weariness in the man's face, the kindness in his dark eyes. He saw the dirt under his fingernails, the uniform of a laborer. He also saw the quiet dignity with which Mateo carried himself. "I could not leave her," Mateo said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. David's eyes then fell on the brown paper bag from Mateo's pocket, now empty, sitting on a nearby table. He looked at his daughter, who was now happily sipping a hot chocolate the barista had given her. "He gave me his sandwich, Daddy," Maya chirped. "And his coat." David's face changed. The last of the suspicion melted away, replaced by a dawning, profound respect. He reached for his wallet, pulling out a thick stack of $100 bills. "Please," he said, offering the money. "Please take this. It's the least I can do." Mateo looked at the money. It was more cash than he had seen in his entire life. It could pay off his debt. It could buy a plane ticket for Lucia to visit. It could change everything. But he slowly, firmly, shook his head. He took a small step back, creating a respectful distance. "No, sir," he said softly, his English careful. "Thank you. But no. I did not do it for money." He met David's gaze, his own eyes clear and unwavering. The gesture hung in the air between them, more powerful than any financial transaction. In a world obsessed with currency, Mateo had just demonstrated a different economy, one built on empathy. He simply nodded, a final, quiet farewell, and turned to walk back out into the rain, leaving a stunned David and a warm, safe child behind. His act was complete. The walk home felt different. The rain was just rain now, water from the sky, not a personal attack. The cold was just cold. Mateo felt a strange warmth inside him, a glow that the weather couldn't touch. He had done a good thing. A right thing. For the first time in a long time, he felt visible in a way that didn't frighten him. He had been seen not as a laborer, not as an immigrant, but as a human being who had helped another. It was a feeling more valuable than any amount of money. When he finally reached his apartment, his roommates were already there, watching a blaring soccer game on a small TV. They nodded at him, and he nodded back. He went to the small, shared bathroom, and looked at his reflection in the cracked mirror. The same tired face looked back, but there was a new light in his eyes. He thought of Maya's smile when she saw her father. He thought of the feel of her small, trusting hand in his. It was enough. He made a simple dinner of rice and beans, his mind already drifting to the next day, to the same backbreaking work, to the same cycle of survival. He fell asleep quickly, the exhaustion finally overwhelming him, but his dreams were not of fear or longing. They were of his daughter, Lucia, laughing and holding the hand of a little blonde girl, both of them safe, both of them happy. Meanwhile, across the city, David was tucking Maya into her bed in her pink, princess-themed room. "Daddy," she whispered, her eyes heavy with sleep. Mateo was nice. He was like a superhero. David kissed her forehead. Yes, honey, he was. He went downstairs, the image of Mateo refusing the money burned into his mind. He couldn't let it go. The man's dignity, his selflessness, it haunted him. He was a businessman, he was used to reading people, and he had read nothing but pure, unadulterated goodness in Mateo. He picked up his phone and scrolled through the contacts of his construction and development firm. He had to find him. He didn't know his last name, he didn't know where he lived, but he had a description, and he knew the general area where he'd found Maya. It was a long shot, but David was a man used to getting what he wanted. And he wanted to find the man who had saved his entire world. The next morning, David was in his office on the 42nd floor, overlooking the city. He had called an urgent meeting with his site foreman and project managers. "I'm looking for a man," he told the assembled group, their faces curious. "His name is Mateo. He's Guatemalan, I believe. Probably in his late 30s. He found my daughter yesterday when she was lost." A murmur of understanding went through the room. They all knew about the panic yesterday. "I owe him a debt that can't be paid with money," David continued, his voice firm. "But I'm going to try. I want you to put the word out on every site, with every subcontractor. If you have a worker named Mateo who fits that description, I want to know. And I want to see him." The men nodded and dispersed. David spent the rest of the morning making calls, his focus singular. He was a man possessed. He contacted local community centers, churches in immigrant neighborhoods, even a few advocacy groups. He described Mateo in detail, his calm demeanor, his work-worn hands, his quiet pride. He was met with caution and suspicion, which he expected. The world he was probing was a closed one, for good reason. He had to prove his intentions were pure. Back on the south side, Mateo was where he always was. On a construction site, high on a scaffold, hauling cinder blocks. His muscles screamed in protest, a familiar song of pain. He thought of the previous day as a strange, beautiful dream. He didn't expect anything to come of it. That wasn't how his life worked. Kindness was its own reward, a fleeting moment of light in a long struggle. He focused on his work, on the rhythm of lifting and placing, his body moving on autopilot. At lunch, he sat with the other men, eating his simple meal. One of them, Carlos, an older man from Oaxaca, mentioned something. "Heard a weird thing today," Carlos said in Spanish. "My foreman on the Lakeshore project was asking around. Some big-shot developer is looking for a guy named Mateo. A Guatemalan. Said he helped his kid." Mateo's blood ran cold. He stopped chewing. The other men looked at him. Everyone knew he was Guatemalan. Everyone knew his name. "What does he want?" Mateo asked, his voice barely a whisper. Carlos shrugged. "Didn't say. Just that he wants to talk to him."
"You in some kind of trouble, 星号 hermano 星号?"
Mateo thought of the police, of immigration. Was this a trick? Had his moment of visibility cost him everything? Fear, his old companion, wrapped its cold fingers around his heart once more. "I don't know," he said. "I don't know." The fear followed Mateo home. Every police siren was a warning. Every stranger's glance felt like a threat. He was quiet that evening, his mind racing. His roommates noticed his tension. "Maybe it's good," one of them, Javier, offered. "The man, he was grateful, no? Maybe he has a job for you. A better job." Mateo shook his head. "Men like that, they don't give jobs to men like us. They say thank you and they forget." He went to bed early, but sleep wouldn't come. He listened to the sounds of the city, each one a potential herald of his doom. The next morning was Saturday, his only day of rest. He was planning to do his laundry and call his mother. The call to his mother was the highlight of his week, the sound of her voice a tether to his humanity. He was just about to dial when a firm, authoritative knock echoed through the small apartment. It wasn't the friendly tap of a neighbor. It was the knock of someone who expected the door to be opened. All four men in the apartment froze. Their eyes met in a shared, silent panic. This was it. La Migra. Or the police. Javier looked through the peephole. His eyes widened. "It's a gringo. In a suit." Mateo's heart plummeted. He knew. He took a deep, shuddering breath. He had faced hardship before. He would face this with the same dignity with which he had faced everything else. He nodded to Javier, who slowly, cautiously, unlocked the door and opened it. There, standing in the dim, grimy hallway of the rundown apartment building, was David. He was dressed more casually today in dark jeans and a sweater, but he still looked impossibly clean, impossibly wealthy, and utterly out of place. His eyes scanned the room and immediately landed on Mateo. A look of immense relief washed over his face. "Mateo," he said, his voice filled with genuine warmth. "I found you." Mateo just stood there, unable to speak, unable to move, bracing for the blow he was sure was coming. David seemed to understand the tension in the room, the frozen fear on the faces of the men. He didn't try to step inside. He remained respectfully in the doorway. "I'm sorry to show up like this," he said, his gaze fixed on Mateo. "I didn't mean to frighten you. I've been looking for you for 2 days." Mateo found his voice, though it was hoarse. "Why?" The single word hung in the air, heavy with a lifetime of caution. David smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Because you refused my money. And because my daughter hasn't stopped talking about the kind man who shared his sandwich and gave her his coat." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I run a construction and development firm, Mateo. DLR Holdings. I'm not just a guy in a suit. I started as a laborer like you. My father was a bricklayer." This was a revelation. Mateo looked at David's hands. For the first time, he noticed a faint, old scar across one knuckle, a relic of a different life. "I know what this work is like," David continued, his tone becoming earnest, intense. "I know the value of a man who works with his hands, and more importantly, I know the value of a man with integrity. I offered you money and you refused. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." He took a small step forward. "I'm here to offer you a job. A real job. Foreman on my new project in Lincoln Park. It's salaried. It comes with benefits. Health insurance. A legal work visa. A path to stability." The room was utterly silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Mateo felt the world tilt on its axis. He heard the words, but his mind couldn't process them. A salaried job. Benefits. A work visa. It wasn't just money. It was a future. It was the key to the prison of his fear. It was the chance to see his daughter without risking everything. It was legitimacy. It was a life. He looked at David, and for the first time, he saw not a powerful, untouchable boss, but a man, a father, who was trying to balance the scales of gratitude in the only way he knew how. Tears, which he had not shed through the hardest moments of his journey, now welled in Mateo's eyes. He blinked them back, but one escaped, tracing a clean path through the fine layer of dust on his cheek. Mateo couldn't speak. The magnitude of the offer had stolen his breath. It was more than he had ever allowed himself to dream of. Javier, standing behind him, gently nudged him. *DKC, hombre, he whispered, his own voice thick with emotion for his friend. Mateo looked around the cramped, poor apartment that had been his home for 2 years. He looked at the faces of his roommates, men who shared his struggle, and he saw not jealousy but hope. His success was their success. It was a proof that goodness could still be rewarded. He turned back to David, and with a voice cracked with emotion, he said the only word that mattered. "Yes." David's face broke into a huge, relieved smile. He stepped forward and this time, he clasped Mateo's hand in both of his. "Thank you," David said. "You have no idea how happy this makes me. You start Monday. We'll get all the paperwork sorted." He handed Mateo a crisp, white business card. "That's my direct number. My personal assistant, Sarah, will call you tomorrow to arrange everything. Welcome to the team, Mateo." And with that, with a final respectful nod to the other men in the room, David turned and left. The door closed, and for a moment, there was silence. Then, a roar of celebration erupted. Javier clapped Mateo on the back, laughing. The other men were talking all at once, in a rapid, joyful mix of Spanish and English. Mateo stood in the center of it all, the business card feeling like the most precious object he had ever held. He walked to the small window that looked out onto the brick wall of the adjacent building. He pulled out his phone, his hands trembling. He dialed the number he knew by heart, It rang twice. Asterisk, Iho, asterisk, his mother's voice came through, laced with its usual worry. Asterisk mama, asterisk, Mateo said. And this time he let the tears flow freely, tears of relief, of joy, of a hope so long deferred it felt like a miracle. Mama, something wonderful has happened. And as he began to tell her the story that started with a lost girl in the rain, the gray light from the window seemed to brighten, illuminating his face, washing it clean of the fear and the weariness, leaving only the profound, transformative glow of a future, finally, within reach.